The first sign appeared on a Tuesday. At least, that was how the story was told afterward, long after the rumors spread, long after the valley changed, long after an entire kingdom was forced to admit it had been wrong. It started with a farmer named Caleb Hurst, a practical wolf, not particularly imaginative, not the sort of man who believed in miracles, which was precisely why everyone believed him. That morning, Caleb loaded an empty basket onto his wagon and headed toward the eastern valley. He wasn't expecting much. Nobody did. The valley had been dead for decades. Everyone knew that. Children learned it in school. Travelers heard warnings before passing through. Merchants avoided it entirely. The land was cursed. At least that was the explanation people preferred. It was easier than admitting nobody truly understood what happened there. The soil rejected seeds. Fruit trees withered. Livestock grew sick. Generation after generation watched the valley fail. Eventually, people stopped trying. Nature reclaimed what little remained, and at the center of it all stood Blackthorn Estate, the haunted house, the place wolves crossed the road to avoid, the place abandoned by every family that ever tried living there, the place where strange sounds echoed at night, the place where Alpha King Rowan's widow now lived. Not that anyone expected her to stay long. 6 months earlier, the pack had practically taken bets on how quickly she would leave. Most estimated a few weeks. The optimistic ones gave her until winter. Nobody imagined she would still be there by spring. Yet here they were. And so was she. Caleb's wagon rolled along the old eastern road. Birdsong echoed through the morning air. A strange sound, because there usually weren't many birds in the valley. The observation barely registered at first. Then he noticed something else. The grass looked thicker, greener, healthier. His frown deepened. That wasn't right. Nothing grew well here. The further he traveled, the stranger things became. Wildflowers lined the roadside. Butterflies drifted through the air. Even the trees appeared fuller, alive. Caleb slowed the wagon, confusion replacing routine. Then he reached the valley itself and dropped the basket. It hit the ground with a loud thud. He didn't notice, because all he could do was stare. The wheat fields were green, not partially recovered, not struggling, thriving. Rows upon rows of healthy crops stretched across the valley floor. Golden sunlight reflected from fresh leaves. The stalks swayed gently in the breeze. Strong, vibrant, impossible. For several moments Caleb simply stood there, certain he was imagining things. Certain he had taken the wrong road, certain there must be some explanation. Yet the valley remained, and so did the wheat. By noon, 3 neighboring villages had heard the news. By afternoon, dozens of wolves traveled east. Some arrived on horseback, others by wagon. A few simply ran. Nobody wanted to miss the miracle. Crowds gathered along the valley's edge, staring, whispering, pointing, trying desperately to understand what they were seeing. The cursed land was alive. The impossible had happened. Questions spread faster than answers. How? Why? Who? Then an elderly shepherd spoke quietly, a simple observation, one that immediately silenced the crowd. The first green field appeared closest to Blackthorn Estate. Heads turned instantly, toward the distant mansion sitting atop a gentle hill. The old house overlooked the entire valley, its dark silhouette familiar to everyone present. And suddenly another realization followed. Someone lived there now. The widow, Evelyn Ashbourne, Alpha King Rowan's forgotten widow. The woman everyone laughed at. The woman everyone abandoned. The woman everyone expected to fail. A strange silence settled over the gathering, because for the first time in 6 months, nobody was laughing anymore. 6 months earlier, the kingdom had gathered to bury a king. Alpha King Rowan Ashbourne died at 72. The announcement sent shockwaves through every territory. For nearly 4 decades, Rowan had ruled the pack. He guided them through droughts, trade collapses, border conflicts, harsh winters. Entire generations had known no other alpha. When he died, the kingdom mourned. The bells rang for 3 days. Black banners hung from every public building. Thousands attended the funeral. Wolves wept openly. Leaders traveled from distant territories to pay their respects. And standing beside the coffin was Evelyn Ashbourne, his widow, the woman who had spent 30 years at his side, 30 years helping him carry the burdens of leadership, 30 years listening to problems nobody else wanted to hear. 30 years serving a kingdom that now looked at her with polite sympathy. At the time, she thought the sympathy was for her grief. She would soon learn otherwise, because funerals have a strange effect on people. They remind everyone that power eventually changes hands. And once power moves, so do loyalties. The first week passed quietly. Visitors filled the palace, condolences arrived daily, council members stopped by to offer support, nobles expressed sorrow. Everyone seemed kind, everyone seemed respectful. Then the second week arrived, and the visits began slowing down. By the third week, several familiar faces stopped appearing entirely. By the fourth, Evelyn found herself eating most meals alone. The change happened gradually, so gradually that she almost missed it. Almost. Until one afternoon, she entered a council chamber she had attended for years. The conversation stopped immediately, not out of respect, out of discomfort. The silence lasted only a few seconds. Then the discussion resumed, without including her. For the first time in 3 decades, nobody asked for her opinion. Nobody requested advice. Nobody seemed interested in what she thought. The realization hurt more than she expected, not because she wanted power, because she suddenly understood how people saw her now. Not as the former Luna, not as the king's closest advisor, not as a leader, a relic, a reminder of an era that had ended. The new Alpha, Marcus Thornridge, took control soon afterward. Young, ambitious, popular among rising noble families, everything Rowan had once been, and everything he wasn't. At first, Marcus treated Evelyn politely, publicly at least. Privately was another matter. Every week, another responsibility disappeared from her schedule. Another committee moved forward without her. Another decision happened elsewhere. The message became increasingly clear. The kingdom no longer needed her, or so they believed. Then came the meeting, the one everyone remembered later. Marcus summoned several council members to the royal chamber. Evelyn attended out of courtesy, nothing more. The discussion lasted less than 20 minutes. By the end of it, her future had been decided. Blackthorn Estate will belong to you. The announcement sounded generous, almost thoughtful. Several nobles even nodded approvingly. If someone didn't know better, Evelyn knew better. Everyone did. Blackthorn Estate wasn't a gift. It was exile wrapped in politeness, a crumbling mansion inside cursed territory, miles from the capital, miles from influence, miles from relevance. The room watched her carefully, waiting for protest, waiting for outrage, waiting for tears. Instead, Evelyn smiled, a small smile, calm, dignified. "Thank you, Alpha." The response surprised everyone, especially Marcus, because there was no argument, no negotiation, no attempt to remain close to power, just acceptance. 3 days later, she packed her belongings. 1 week later, she left the capital, and as her carriage disappeared down the eastern road, many wolves whispered the same prediction. The widow wouldn't survive the winter. Unfortunately for them, they underestimated the wrong woman. The first thing Evelyn noticed about Blackthorn Estate was the silence. Not peaceful silence, abandoned silence. The kind that settles over places forgotten for too long. Her carriage rolled through rusted gates hanging crooked on broken hinges. Weeds swallowed the old stone pathway. Dead vines climbed the mansion walls. Several windows were shattered. Others had been boarded shut years earlier. The estate looked less like a home and more like a memory nobody wanted. One of the servants traveling with her stared at the mansion and muttered quietly, "Moon Goddess, help us." Evelyn almost smiled. The prayer felt appropriate, because Blackthorn looked worse than she imagined, and her imagination had been quite pessimistic. The coachman unloaded her trunks. The servants exchanged uncertain glances. No one seemed eager to enter. Unfortunately, the estate wasn't improving from the outside, so Evelyn picked up her own bag and walked toward the front door. If she expected ghosts, she found none. Dust, however, was everywhere. The entrance hall looked untouched for decades. Furniture sat beneath white sheets. Cobwebs filled the corners. The air smelled of old wood and neglect. A lesser woman might have cried. A wiser woman might have left. Evelyn did neither. Instead, she opened windows, ordered rooms cleaned, made a list, then another, then several more. Years spent beside a king had taught her something important. Every overwhelming problem became manageable once divided into smaller ones. The estate was simply another problem, a very large one. The first month passed slowly. The roof leaked during rainstorms. The kitchen chimney barely functioned. The well produced only a trickle of water. Half the barns stood on the verge of collapse. Every day revealed 3 new disasters, sometimes 5. The servants grew increasingly nervous, especially after sunset. Strange sounds echoed through the estate at night. Floorboards creaked, doors shifted. Wind howled through damaged sections of the house. The rumors about ghosts returned quickly. By the 2nd month, 3 servants resigned. The 4th left shortly afterward. Each departure sounded similar. The estate is cursed. There are spirits here. Something feels wrong. Evelyn wished them well, then continued working. Because despite the stories, she noticed something interesting. Every supposed haunting had an explanation. The strange knocking came from loose shutters. The moaning sounds came from damaged pipes. The mysterious footsteps belonged to raccoons living inside the walls. Ghosts required far less effort than maintenance, which was probably why people preferred believing in them. One rainy afternoon, while inspecting an unused wing of the mansion, Evelyn discovered a locked room. The door sat hidden behind old shelves in what had once been the estate library. Most people would have ignored it. Evelyn had spent 30 years married to a king. Curiosity was practically a survival skill. After locating the key in an ancient desk, she opened the room. Dust exploded into the air. Rows of shelves emerged from the darkness. Books, maps, ledgers, journals, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands. The estate's private archives, forgotten by everyone, including history. Over the following weeks, Evelyn spent every evening reading. Generation after generation of records, farm reports, construction plans, land surveys, agricultural journals. The deeper she looked, the stranger things became. Because the records didn't describe a cursed valley. They described a thriving one, a prosperous one of the richest agricultural regions in the kingdom. The contradiction bothered her deeply. How could land produce record harvests for centuries and then suddenly become cursed? The explanation made no sense, so she kept reading, kept comparing documents, kept searching. Then one night, nearly 3 months after arriving, she found a map. Old, hand-drawn, detailed, and marked with something the modern valley no longer possessed. A vast network of irrigation channels, ancient water routes running beneath nearly every field. Evelyn stared at the map for a long time, then slowly looked toward the dark valley beyond the library window. A possibility began forming, a simple one, a dangerous one. What if the land wasn't cursed? What if everyone had simply stopped understanding it? And for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Estate, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Most people would have ignored the map. That was the first conclusion Evelyn reached. Not because they were foolish, because they were practical. The valley had been called cursed for nearly 50 years. Entire generations grew up believing it. Children inherited the story from parents. Parents inherited it from grandparents. At some point, the explanation stopped being questioned. It simply became truth. And truth, once accepted long enough, becomes difficult to challenge, even when evidence says otherwise. Evelyn spent the next several weeks studying the estate archives. Every evening after work, every morning before sunrise, every spare moment she could find. The more she read, the clearer the pattern became. The valley's decline hadn't happened overnight. It happened gradually. One broken irrigation channel, then another, then another. Water supplies weakened, crop yields decreased, fields became harder to maintain, farmers abandoned the land. The remaining residents blamed bad luck. Then superstition, then curses. By the time the final water routes collapsed, nobody remembered they existed. The discovery fascinated her and saddened her, because the valley wasn't destroyed by magic. It was destroyed by neglect. The solution suddenly seemed obvious: repair the water, restore the land. Simple in theory, far less simple in practice. The irrigation system stretched for miles. Many sections lay buried beneath decades of overgrowth. Others had collapsed entirely. Some portions existed only on ancient maps, yet every challenge produced the same response. Evelyn began working. The remaining workers thought she was slightly mad, possibly completely mad. The former Luna spent her mornings digging trenches, clearing debris, inspecting forgotten waterways. No one expected that, least of all the villagers who occasionally passed through Blackthorn. At first they watched from a distance, curious, skeptical. Amused, one elderly shepherd stopped by almost every afternoon, never helping, simply observing. Finally, after nearly a month, he approached. "You really believe this will work?" Evelyn leaned against a shovel. Sweat covered her forehead, mud stained her gloves. She looked nothing like a former Luna. The realization pleased her. "Yes." The old man blinked. "You sound certain." Evelyn smiled faintly. "No." Honesty lingered in her voice. "I'm hopeful." The shepherd laughed. A genuine laugh, not mocking, almost admiring. Then the following morning he returned, with a shovel. Others followed, slowly. One worker became 3, 3 became 7. The villagers never admitted they believed her. They simply started helping, and together they uncovered the first major channel, then the second, then a third. The work was exhausting, but the results appeared surprisingly quickly. One afternoon, water flowed through a restored channel for the first time in decades. The sound silenced everyone. Workers stopped moving, villagers stared, children ran alongside the stream laughing. The moment felt strangely emotional, as though the valley itself had been holding its breath, waiting. Weeks passed, spring arrived, the earth softened, the days grew warmer, and then something happened, something small, something easy to miss. A cluster of wildflowers appeared beside a repaired waterway, tiny blue blossoms, fragile, beautiful, impossible. The villagers discovered them first. Word spread quickly. People traveled simply to look, not because flowers were remarkable, because of where they grew. Nothing survived here, nothing. Yet somehow these flowers had. The blooms multiplied over the following days, then over the following weeks. Soon patches of color appeared throughout the valley, blue, yellow, white, signs of life where death once dominated. The rumors began changing. People no longer whispered about curses. They whispered about Evelyn, the widow, the woman rebuilding Blackthorn, the woman who believed the land when nobody else did. And as spring deepened, the valley prepared to reveal something even more extraordinary. Because the flowers were only the beginning, the flowers were followed by grass. The grass was followed by crops, and the crops changed everything. By early summer, the valley no longer resembled the dead land people remembered. Green stretched across fields that had once been barren. Fruit trees produced blossoms. Vegetable gardens flourished. Even the livestock appeared healthier. The transformation happened so quickly that some villagers became convinced magic was involved after all. Evelyn found the irony amusing. For decades, people blamed magic for the valley's decline. Now they blamed magic for its recovery. Apparently, hard work remained the least popular explanation. The first successful harvest arrived 3 months later. It exceeded every expectation. Workers celebrated openly. Villagers filled the estate courtyard. Children raced between wagons overflowing with produce. For the first time in years, Blackthorn felt alive. Not haunted, not abandoned, alive. Yet the greatest discovery was still waiting. It happened on a rainy evening. The kind of evening Evelyn once spent beside Rowan, reviewing reports. The memory still hurt, less sharply than before, but grief had a habit of lingering. That night, she returned to the hidden archive, searching through boxes that had remained untouched for decades. One chest in particular caught her attention. Unlike the others, it carried the royal seal, Rowan's seal. Her heartbeat quickened immediately. Carefully, she opened it. Inside lay several journals, maps, letters, and one sealed document addressed in her late husband's handwriting, to Evelyn. The sight nearly brought tears to her eyes. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter and began reading. The words felt familiar instantly. Rowan's voice seemed to echo from the page, steady, thoughtful, patient. The letter revealed a truth he had never shared publicly. Blackthorn Valley was never ordinary farmland. Long before the kingdom existed, it served as the region's primary agricultural basin, the richest soil in the territory, the most productive land in the realm. Entire generations prospered because of it. Then politics intervened. Several powerful noble families gained control of trade routes elsewhere. Their wealth depended upon maintaining influence over food distribution. A thriving Blackthorn threatened that influence, so investments stopped, maintenance disappeared, infrastructure collapsed. The valley slowly deteriorated, and because neglect happened gradually, few people questioned it. The nobles profited, the land suffered, the kingdom forgot. Evelyn sat silently for several minutes after finishing the letter. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The old library seemed impossibly quiet, because suddenly everything made sense. The abandoned irrigation channels, the missing maintenance records, the decades of neglect. None of it happened accidentally. The valley hadn't failed. It had been allowed to fail, deliberately. Then came the final revelation, one that made Evelyn's breath catch. Rowan knew. For years, perhaps decades, he spent much of his reign gathering information, studying records, planning restoration efforts, but crises kept intervening. Droughts, political conflicts, economic problems. There was always another emergency demanding attention. He intended to restore Blackthorn eventually. He simply ran out of time. The realization broke her heart and healed part of it simultaneously, because suddenly she understood something. She wasn't creating Rowan's dream. She was finishing it. The thought remained with her for days, then weeks. Meanwhile, word of Blackthorn's recovery continued spreading. Soon neighboring villages arrived, then merchants, then investors, then traders from territories hundreds of miles away. Everyone wanted to see the miracle. Everyone wanted to understand how a cursed valley became fertile again. The caravans grew larger every month, and with every new arrival, Blackthorn's value increased. The abandoned estate was becoming something else, something powerful, something important. Which meant it was only a matter of time before the people who once laughed at Evelyn started paying attention. And when they did, they came running. The first noble arrived in autumn. He came smiling. That should have been the first warning. Lord Whitmore had not visited Blackthorn when the roof leaked. He had not visited when workers abandoned the estate. He had certainly not visited when everyone expected Evelyn to freeze through winter. Yet suddenly, there he was, standing at her front door with a basket of expensive wine and a remarkably warm smile. "My dear Lady Evelyn." The greeting sounded almost affectionate. Almost. Evelyn invited him inside anyway. 30 years in royal politics had taught her an important lesson. People reveal themselves eventually. Sometimes all you have to do is wait. Lord Whitmore didn't disappoint. The conversation lasted less than 20 minutes before he mentioned investment opportunities, then partnerships, then future agricultural expansion. The pattern became painfully obvious. He wasn't visiting Evelyn. He was visiting success. After he left, another guest arrived, then another, then 5 more. By the end of the month, Blackthorn Estate received more visitors than it had during the previous 10 years combined. The transformation was almost comical. Nobles who once mocked the valley now praised its potential. Families who avoided Blackthorn suddenly described it as visionary. Merchants who once laughed at the idea of restoring the estate now competed for trade contracts. The hypocrisy might have been irritating. Instead, Evelyn found it fascinating. People changed quickly when money became involved. Very quickly. One afternoon, she stood overlooking the valley as a caravan arrived from the Western Territories. More than 30 wagons, investors, traders, business representatives. The sight would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Beside her stood old Shepherd Harris, the same man who once watched her dig irrigation channels alone, the same man who eventually brought a shovel and started helping. He shook his head slowly. "They all think they discovered Blackthorn." Evelyn laughed softly. The old shepherd wasn't wrong. Many visitors spoke as though the valley's success appeared suddenly, as though prosperity emerged on its own. Very few remembered the years of neglect, the broken channels, the endless labor, the uncertainty. Success attracted attention. Struggle rarely did. The lesson seemed universal. By winter, Blackthorn had become the kingdom's fastest-growing economic region. Harvest numbers shattered records, trade routes expanded dramatically, new businesses appeared throughout the valley. Even neighboring villages benefited from the growth. The transformation affected everyone, which made the next development inevitable. The capital began paying attention, officially. One morning, a royal messenger arrived carrying a sealed letter. The sight immediately attracted attention. Royal correspondence rarely brought simple news. Evelyn opened the message while seated in her study. The contents were brief, formal, predictable. The harvest assembly would take place in 6 weeks. Representatives from every territory would attend, and the Alpha personally requested her presence. Evelyn stared at the letter for a long moment, then set it down. Across the room, her steward looked curious. Good news? She smiled faintly. I'm not sure yet. Because she knew exactly why the invitation arrived. The kingdom had ignored Blackthorn when it was failing. The kingdom had forgotten her when she was alone. Now Blackthorn was valuable. Now she was useful. The timing felt remarkably convenient. Outside, workers continued loading wagons with produce. The valley bustled with activity. Life flourished everywhere she looked. And for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn, Evelyn realized something important. She no longer needed the kingdom's approval. The thought felt surprisingly freeing. Unfortunately for the new Alpha, he was about to learn that lesson the difficult way. The new Alpha arrived at Blackthorn on a cold autumn morning. He brought 20 guards, 3 advisors, 2 carriages, and enough ceremony to announce his presence long before anyone actually saw him. Evelyn watched the procession from the porch of the estate. Beside her, Shepherd Harris snorted. Funny. What is? The old man pointed toward the approaching convoy. When you first arrived, nobody wanted to visit. Evelyn smiled. Now they needed an escort. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Alpha Marcus Thornridge stepped from the lead carriage with practiced confidence. Young, well-dressed, carefully composed, the image of leadership, at least from a distance. Up close, Evelyn noticed something else: discomfort. The moment Marcus looked across the valley, his expression changed, only slightly, but enough, because the reports hadn't prepared him for reality. The fields stretched endlessly across the horizon. Golden crops swayed beneath the autumn wind. Storage barns overflowed with produce. Workers moved efficiently between loading stations. Merchants negotiated contracts throughout the marketplace. Blackthorn wasn't recovering. Blackthorn was thriving. And standing in the center of it all was the woman he sent away. Marcus spent the entire day touring the valley. The more he saw, the quieter he became. Everywhere he went, people told the same story. Not rehearsed, not coordinated, simply true. The irrigation channels, the restoration projects, the new farming methods, the trade routes, the schools being built, the clinics being funded. Again and again, one name surfaced: Evelyn. Evelyn suggested it. Evelyn organized it. Evelyn paid for it. Evelyn fixed it. By late afternoon, Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable. The pattern reminded Evelyn of something. The same realization people experienced after a bridge collapsed. Nobody noticed it while it worked. Only after seeing the damage did they understand how important it had been. Except Blackthorn was the opposite. People only understood her value after seeing what happened when she was finally allowed to work freely. The tour ended near sunset. Marcus stood overlooking the valley from a hillside. The view was spectacular. Thousands of acres transformed from wasteland into prosperity. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. You accomplished something remarkable. The compliment sounded genuine. That surprised her. Evelyn folded her hands. The land accomplished it. Marcus laughed softly. You always do that. She raised an eyebrow. Do what? Share the credit. The observation lingered between them, because it wasn't entirely wrong. For decades, Evelyn had worked quietly behind the scenes, helping, supporting, organizing, never demanding recognition, never expecting applause. The kingdom grew accustomed to that, perhaps too accustomed. Marcus stared across the fields again. His expression thoughtful now, not political, personal. Do you know what the council says about Blackthorn? Evelyn shook her head. I try not to collect opinions. A faint smile appeared. They call it the most valuable territory in the kingdom. Silence. Then Marcus added quietly, 6 months ago, they called it a burden. The words hung heavily in the evening air because both of them remembered. The estate, the exile, the laughter, the assumptions, all of it. Neither needed to discuss it further. The truth was already obvious. The kingdom had not changed. The value had always existed. Only their ability to recognize it had changed. As darkness settled across the valley, a messenger approached carrying a sealed invitation, the official summons to the Harvest Assembly, the kingdom's largest gathering of the year. Marcus accepted the document, then handed it to Evelyn. For a moment, their eyes met. And suddenly she understood. This wasn't a celebration. Not entirely. Something else waited at the assembly, something political, something important, something Marcus wasn't quite ready to discuss. The realization settled quietly in her mind, and as she accepted the invitation, Evelyn had a feeling the kingdom was about to reveal exactly how much it wanted what it once threw away. For several seconds after Evelyn finished speaking, the great hall remained completely silent. Not the polite silence of a formal assembly, the uncomfortable kind, the kind that appears when everyone hears a truth they would rather avoid. Alpha Marcus stood motionless. The proposal he had carefully prepared suddenly felt much smaller than it had moments earlier, because there was no argument, no clever response, no political explanation capable of changing what everyone already knew. Blackthorn had not become valuable because the kingdom invested in it. It became valuable because one woman refused to abandon it. The distinction mattered, and now an entire kingdom was remembering it at the same time. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again, then slowly exhaled. To his credit, he did not attempt to deny the truth. Many leaders would have. Many leaders had. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, not in surrender, in acknowledgement. "You are right." The admission surprised the hall. A few nobles exchanged startled glances. Others looked relieved, because pretending otherwise would have insulted everyone's intelligence. Marcus looked toward the crowd, then back at Evelyn. "When Blackthorn failed, we abandoned it." Silence. "When you succeeded, we rushed back." The honesty softened some of the tension. Not entirely, but enough. Because accountability was rare. And rare things often carried weight. The proposal to reclaim the valley quietly disappeared that afternoon. No vote occurred, no debate followed. The idea simply dissolved beneath the reality of what Blackthorn had become, and who made it possible. The assembly ended soon afterward, yet the story continued spreading, across villages, across trade routes, across neighboring territories. Everywhere people discussed the harvest assembly, they repeated the same moment. Not the speeches, not the economics, not even the miraculous harvests. They remembered Evelyn's words, because everyone had witnessed some version of the same thing. People dismissing value until value becomes profitable. People overlooking contributions until contributions become impossible to ignore. Blackthorn continued growing in the years that followed. New farms appeared throughout the valley. Trade expanded. Schools opened. Businesses flourished. The once abandoned estate became the center of one of the most prosperous regions in the kingdom. Visitors arrived constantly, some seeking opportunities, others seeking inspiration. Many simply wanted to see the famous haunted estate. The irony always made Evelyn smile. The house was never haunted. The land was never cursed. The only thing truly haunting Blackthorn had been neglect. And neglect, unlike ghosts, leaves very real damage behind. As for Evelyn, she never returned to the capital permanently. She visited when necessary, attended important assemblies, offered advice when asked, but her home remained in the valley, among the fields, among the people who helped rebuild it, among the life that grew where everyone expected failure. Years later, children learned the story differently than their parents had lived it. They didn't remember the political maneuvering. They didn't remember inheritance disputes. They didn't remember the laughter. They remembered a widow, a woman everyone underestimated, a woman everyone thought was finished, a woman sent away to a place nobody wanted, and somehow that became the beginning of her greatest chapter. Every spring, when wildflowers covered the hills surrounding Blackthorn, visitors gathered to admire the view. The flowers stretched across the valley in brilliant colors. Blue, yellow, white, living proof of what patience and belief could accomplish. And as generations passed, one lesson endured. Sometimes the place everyone fears isn't cursed. Sometimes it's simply waiting for someone willing to care. And sometimes the person everyone writes off as finished is only just beginning.